Holy amazing years, Batman. 1998 was as good as they come. I mean, we're in what, 4th episode maybe? And it's still chock full of fun releases. But it's probably best that you see for yourself. Enemy Infestation is what you get when my boss's wife enters our office. I mean, it's her business, she co-owns it, and I just work there, but she's definitely not a friend. She's kinda like diarrhea, you know? It happens, you didn't know why and where it came from, and you just gotta suffer through, hoping that after it's over, it won't be back for a while. No, let me rephrase that. She's exactly like diarrhea. Anyway, Enemy Infestation is quite coincidentally also a sci-fi themed squad-based RTS. And it's one that I've never played, so yeah, keep that in mind. Aliens landed on the human colony of Reda V, and we have to stop their invasion. Scratch that. Aliens crash landed in their colonizing pod in a fiery blaze on our far-off colony, and that's how the invasion begins. Enemy Infestation sends you on 27 blood pressure-raising missions of various objectives, ranging from rescuing colonists to straightforward extermination of all alien forces and anything in between. So far it doesn't sound very special at all, does it? Well, it features a very unique mechanic of certain weapons having different effects on aliens and requiring you to always adjust what you're using so that you would stay as effective at debugging the colony as you are. For example, in one mission, your chosen weapon may freeze the enemies or even shrink them, making them easy targets for squashing. And as soon as you get used to it and think of it as the ultimate tool of distraction, patent pending, you may realize a mission or two away that the enemies somehow adjusted to that gun and now it multiplies them, effectively working against you and in their favor. Fortunately, it only affects those quote-unquote better weapons, so some of the less impressive ones always only pew-pew the aliens into a pile of goo. While objectives and weapon effects are really unusual for the genre and will keep you on your toes, the maps are rather disappointing. There's only 5 of them and the game keeps rotating them all throughout it. Which means that over 27 missions, you'll become very intimate with their layout and know every inch of them by heart by the end game. But, and that's what I took from numerous reviews I read of it, but you will complete the game despite that, as it's ultimately a rather fun title, apparently worth the time investment. Blood to the Chosen is a sequel to the first one and takes place a little over 100 years later in 2028. Called formerly known as Cabal, is Cabal Co. now a huge corporation controlling most of what happens in a futuristic, cyberpunk-inspired city the game is set in. The world of Blood 2 is dark, grime and dystopian, just the way I hope it would be. Since demon worshipped by the Cabal, Chernobog, has been long gone following the events of the first Blood, Gideon, Cabal Co.'s CEO, aims to bring him back to life and kill Caleb. So, well, you. And that's the gist of it really. From this point onward, you'll on your own and will have to destroy Cabal Co. and find and stop Gideon before it's too late. Blood to the Chosen could be simplified to one sentence. More of the same, but better. Or much better really, as everything that it's built of has been expanded upon and made more enjoyable and involving. The levels are more diverse and unique than previously, they feature as many, if not more even hidden areas worth finding and exploring. The visual design of Blood 2 is rather pleasant to the eye and the theme fitting too, with dark side alleys, wide roads and numerous buildings you'd think to find in a futuristic metropolis, so museums, science complexes, slums and the likes. There are many more kinds of enemies now too, and they are as dangerous as always and still dying in same-sized puddles of red goo as they used to. There are 17 weapons in Blood 2, many of them with dual shooting modes, so you'll have to familiarize yourself with them to pick your faves. Especially that there is only 10 weapon slots, so you will need to limit yourself to those that you like the most or those that work the best. Dealer's choice. I mean gamer's choice. You play as Caleb, obviously, and while there's few other playable so-called chosen characters to pick from, each with their own weapon specializations, all feeling unique and interesting in their own way, it's worth pointing out that the story movies are only played for Caleb, so at least your first playthrough should be as him. Blood 2 is a definite step up from its predecessor, and a pretty darn good game if you enjoy FPSs. King's Quest Mask of Eternity is the 8th installment in the series and the first one made entirely in full 3D. It's still an adventure RPG mixture, but this time with much more emphasis put on action sequences and role-playing, mainly on the first one. So the main protagonist Connor may encounter enemies and creatures he'd need to fight, and he can do it with either melee weapons or at range with a bow. Most puzzles that you'll encounter are inventory-based, but some dialogue and environmental ones will pop up from time to time too. Connor earns experience and level ups as you progress through the game, and both weapons and armor can be purchased for money obtained from defeated foes. Story-wise, the leader of all Archons, powerful wielders of magic, destroys the mystical Mask of Eternity. His doing sends out a powerful shockwave of magic energy, turning most of Kingdom's citizens into stone and scattering the mask pieces all around the world. You, playing as Connor, a villager/fighter and seemingly unimportant person in any way imaginable, seem to be the only one unharmed. So you pick up the mask piece that lands at your feet and head off to figure out what's what and, more importantly, why. Soon after, you learn from Half-Stone Wizard what really transpired, what's your destiny, and he'll even conjure a magic map for you for good measure, and trust me, it will be very useful on your adventure, mainly for teleporting all around when it unlocks. So, being the unsuspected hero that you've become, you decide to save the Kingdom of Daventry and rescue everyone that's been petrified. Your adventure will take you through many different realms where you'll be helping people seeking mask pieces and, most importantly, clues on the location of the next ones, all the way to the Arch-Archon's altar room where you'll have to face him. Oh my, did I just spoil a portion of the ending? Ignore everything I said, I do not know or understand anything. I need an adult? Yeah, let's stick to that. Mask of Eternity was a huge sidestep from previous King's Quest games in the series. For one, transforming from 2D to 3D, in my eyes at least, was totally unnecessary and made it more arcadish than I liked it to be. And secondly, it's the first game in which you don't control a familiar member of the royal family, but a Mr. Nobody. Much less of an issue, but those who got used to the former ones will definitely notice. All in all, Mask of Eternity is a good game, not as good as the earlier ones were, but worth experiencing and completing nonetheless. Commandos Behind the Enemy Lines is a real-time squad-based tactics title taking place across the entire World War II theater, from North African deserts through Italy, France, all the way to Norway among others. The game is divided into 20 separate long and very tactical missions, through which you'll have to lead a group of 6 elite commandos, fulfilling various interestingly designed objectives. You'll destroy enemy installations of strategic importance, so explode them into non-existence. You'll sabotage their carefully crafted plans in different ways, sometimes showing up like a Spanish Inquisition, so unexpectedly and without prior warning armed to the teeth in witty remarks and sarcasm. You'll assassinate their leaders from afar or execution style, damage or incapacitate their vehicles, so battleships or trains to name a few. You'll rescue captured GIs and, generally speaking, cause as much disruption and commotion as it's possible, all to allow the Allied forces to have a chance at winning the war. Now, not all 6 of your commandos will be available at all times, so mission will only call for use of a few. Each of those brave soldiers, however, have their own special and unique skill sets and characteristics. One's a trained killer, then there's a sniper, demolition expert, spy, diver and driver. And all of them are essential, so death of either will require a restart, as they will be needed in the future operations. You don't have to restart straight away though, and can spend your remaining time scouting them up and planning your second approach, because if you look at Commandos objectively, it's actually a puzzle game, in which you need to figure out and then plan out the algorithm of how to complete each stage as efficiently and fast as possible. Each of the levels has a set of few specific objectives, which need to be completed for the mission to end up a success. And while there's no set and written in stone single way of completing any of the levels, and most can be approached in different ways from different sides tackling objectives in your chosen order, some plans are definitely better than others. You can turn on preview of what the enemy sees, which will allow you to observe cones representing their view ranges. This will help to learn their patrol routes and plan your dance around them down to the last step. Also, many of the missions, especially later on, may require performing various tasks in different parts of the map at once or in close succession. Now, in most games it would require hella mouse and keyboard gymnastics and ungodly reaction times too. Fortunately, Commandos features kinda picture-in-picture mode, allowing you to keep a constant and hawk-like eye on up to 8 different locations in the game. So, problem solved. Upon its release, Commandos was a huge hit and quickly spawned a whole slew of follow-ups, all of them equally as good and successful. Warhammer Dark Omen is a real-time tactical strategy set in the fantasy world of Warhammer that originated from the tabletop game and is a direct sequel to 1995's Shadow of the Horned Rat. It features a number of improvements as compared to its predecessor, namely streamlined and more user-friendly interface, greater 3D-generated terrain, using line of sight for ranged units for instance, improved army management, and much more focus on the plot, which is now linear but also more engaging and allowing you to influence it with some meaningful choices from time to time. But easily the biggest change of them all had to be the inclusion of multiplayer, which allowed players to lead any of the armies present in the game, so Imperial, Orcish or the Undead. And based on the score in these battles, players would be rewarded money that then they could use to prepare for the next encounter, which was a decent idea in theory, but hardly working in real-life environment. as it meant that the winner got more spoils and henceforth was better prepared for the next battle, having a considerable advantage against the loser. Story-wise, after stopping the Skaven plot in the former title, you and your group of mercenaries are called into the city of Altdorf for a meeting with Emperor Karl Franz. An honor like no other, but also such an unusual for a group of mercenaries situation to find themselves in, that it's clear from the get-go that something terrible must lurk on the horizon. And as predicted, you're told that the orcs started invading Border Princess from the south, seemingly out of nowhere, and by the looks of it, it's just the beginning of something bigger and more menacing. Naturally, you agree to help, and soon enough learn that the orcs were not just invading the kingdom, in fact, they were not invading at all, but running away from something much, much worse. Huge and seemingly unstoppable army of the undead. Dark Omen's story is much deeper than its earlier outing and will see many twists and turns, which, if you're a fan of the fantasy, will no doubt keep you engaged all the way through. And that, coupled with all the fixes and changes made to the Horned Rats formula, made it an addictive and enjoyable package that most fans of RTSs will no doubt appreciate. Final Fantasy VII is a legendary postmodern steampunk RPG that stole the hearts of millions of gamers, was and is a favorite game in the series for as many, depicting a unique world where humans live along the robots, mutants and even dragons. Also, a game I never really got into. Now, before you threaten me with crucifixion, let me explain. I am not questioning its historical significance, depth of the story, or even quality of all of its building blocks. I understand it all and I appreciate it all, truly. It's just when it came out on PC, I was kinda internally struggling with finding will to play JRPGs at all, not this one in particular, finding them mechanically simplistic and focusing on the story only, and given that Baldur's Gate and second Fallout hit the market the very same year, the latter one especially, my RPG bone, please do not mistake it with boner, had enough experiences to tickle it to completion. Oh my god, however I wanna put it, and regardless how it sounds in my head, it always comes out wrong. Name of my sex tape. Still, what I mean is the timing was just not right. I was fighting an inner battle with JRPGs by 1998 and had my hands full of other Western role-playing titles that were what I was mainly into. And then the years passed and I just never came back to it. So yeah, now that you know, is it really worth it to go after me in the comments? It kinda is, for the algorithm, at least from my point of view, so do or do not, there is no try. Oh my god, cringe, I gotta stop this. The game sees its famous protagonist, Cloud Strife, party up with Barret, Tifa and few others to take on Sephiroth and Shannara Corporation. Corporation that is the main supplier of advanced technology to the world of Final Fantasy. And it does so by fueling its inventions with the so-called macro energy. Energy that's harvested from the planet and one that is its near literal lifeblood. So, the more they take, the more imbalance is introduced into the nature and the closer is the complete collapse of the world. So, you and your merry group of hopeless heroes have to take on the corporation and stop Sephiroth from destroying the world. Final Fantasy's combat system is turn-based, tactical and a natural progression of that seen in the earlier games in the series. It utilizes so-called limit breaks, unique and very powerful attacks available to pull off by characters that sustain plenty enough damage without dying to fill up their limit gauge. Each character can have few of these, and unlocking most will require completion of numerous in-game side activities. Final Fantasy's graphics are a mixture of pre-rendered static environments with real-time 3D characters, kinda like in Alone in the Dark, but dare I say it, less impactful. I dared. What did I mean by that though? Well, given the year, the quality of 3D characters was rather decent, even if unspectacular, but the backgrounds, so stages that the adventure took place on, were of lower resolution and quality. Sure, some of them looked very atmospheric and grungy, but the quality varied from location to location and wasn't always as high as you'd liked it to be. That said, the story, which is now so iconic that everyone more or less knows it, even those who'd never played the game, definitely defended Final Fantasy against all the complaints anyone might have had and is engraved in memories of most gamers of the time. Now, that's gonna be an unpopular opinion, and a second one in this video at that. I realize that I may upset some of you with it, but Mortal Kombat 4 was shit. It was the first full 3D game in the series and a natural evolution of the title. Yup, I know what I just said, it's not a praise. It came way too early though, and that evolution should have taken place 5 years later, when 3D matured a bit more, like a good wine, and when we finally had powerful enough systems to handle it looking good. What Mortal Kombat 4 was upon its release though, was a blocky and visually unattractive mess. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was not an inherently bad game, and there were definitely those that looked worse, but what it was Mortal Kombat. And after a series of excellent releases in the franchise, this was very disappointing. Anyway, it featured 15 different characters to choose from, with many of the fan favorites coming back to reprise their roles in the tournament, and some new ones complementing them with a wave of freshness. If I'm to be honest, I'd take Mortal Kombat 4 without these new combatants, if only the game would be more polished, especially in terms of presentation. Cause the way it looked, even compared to earlier 2D ones, was lacking. In earlier games, all fighters were human. Scratch that, in earlier games, most fighters were human, digitized and smoothly animated. Mortal Kombat 4 feels more like a game of puppets. Puppets that bleed, that is. Not all changes were for the worse though. Weapons were an interesting addition, perhaps not necessary and a bit over the top, but an interesting one and definitely prolonging the stay of the game. Ability to interact with the environment, like picking up of rocks, severed heads or dropped weapons, was fun too. And finally, removal of all the stupid babalities, friendships and the likes that diluted the series a little was a good call too. In MK4, it was 2 fatalities per character again and a dark and grim atmosphere all throughout. All that said, I still think it was shit. And I say it as someone who'd spent countless hours playing these turds, splashing fountains of red all over my screen, day in, day out. Why do I keep insisting that it's that bad? Because when I try to objectively compare it to these that came before and after, short of spin-off games obviously, then most of them in my opinion were much better. Maybe with an exception of Mortal Kombat Unchained, which was not great either, but that was a portable release only and port of much better Mortal Kombat Deception. Anyway, if you like versus fighters, Mortal Kombat and bucketfuls of blood, you'll probably enjoy MK4. But know that nearly any other game in the series is better. Gex Enter the Gecko is the second game in the series and a 3D action platformer in which you play as the titular Gex and have to navigate through series of colorful levels stylized to be parodies of well-known TV series and movies, with Looney Tunes, Gilligan's Island, Star Wars and Friday the 13th being some of the most prominent ones. The big villain of the previous title, Res, the overworld of television, returns and once again takes over the media dimension, seeing that there's no one more capable of stopping him than someone who'd done it before, so you playing as Gex, are tasked with wrecking him once and for all. At first you refuse, cause that sweet Scraps Season 2 isn't going to binge itself, but seeing as the agents who asked you for your help decided that abduction upon such refusal is the way to go, and then showered you with tons of money and gadgets, you know, Walkmans, quad-color pens and video game themed lighters, you eventually agreed to once more take down the root of all bad TV programming. Gex Enter the Gecko is a full 3D open-level platformer in vein of 3D Mario, seeing you go through various different TV series and movie-themed stages, collecting remote controls to unlock more regular, boss and secret levels and searching for Res. Gex's moveset consists of tail whipping, tail bouncing and a flying karate kick. He can also climb certain walls and ceilings, which helps a lot in some of the environmental puzzling sections. So, that's not bad and a nice range of actions to perform. Most levels play exactly like 3D Mario, with Gex's moves being enough to defeat any and all enemies that he comes across, but some tougher ones may require interacting with the environment to put them down, like shooting cannons at the dragon for instance. Gex is known to spew one-liners and wisecrack jokes left and right, most of which originated from pop culture, and these are more often than not quite good and add flavor touches to this already rather enjoyable game. Presentation-wise, the levels are all interestingly designed, Gex's character is detailed and nicely animated, so nothing to complain about here, but some of the enemies could use extra few polygons to appear less blocky. It's not a game breaker in any shape or form, but just feels like an easily avoidable overlooking in an otherwise rather great game. In the grim future of 2037, when police forces have long been disassembled due to their incompetence at stopping ever-growing crime, it's down to numerous various private security companies to protect the citizens. For a fee, that is. So, if you can afford it, your life's generally speaking peaceful and idle in this future. A multinational biotech company, Syntech, secretly creates a new drug aptly named Syn, so that no one would figure out where it came from. Game logic. And they flood the market with it, effectively monopolizing it by offering stronger sensations for a better price. You, playing as John Blade, an excellent name for the ass-kicker that you are, and working for Hardcops, one of the most well-known security companies, will have to deal with the situation and save the city from the addictive plague that the Syn is. Syn, the game, and not the drug, is a first-person perspective shooter based on the modified Quake 2 engine. While the arsenal that you'll have access to is rather standard for the genre, and one would risk saying boring, so rifles, pistols, rocket launchers and plasma rifles to name a few, and no odd weapons like freezing or shrinking rays, it all actually makes perfect sense. Because Syn, unlike most games at the time, incorporated a rather realistic damage model. So, for instance, shooting the enemy in the leg would slow them down considerably, and headshots were practically 99% of the time fatal. So Sin replaced variety for realism. And you know what? It paid off. It was different than the spongy damage-soaking enemies I was used to and felt refreshing, even if there were no out-of-this-world guns to do so with. Sin was also the first FPS ever to feature missions catered and relying on stealth only, where your objective was to fulfill certain conditions without being noticed. And if you were detected at any point, the game would end with a failure. To add more sugar to this already sweet pie of a game, some mission outcomes could be different depending on your actions throughout them. It's not something that would surprise you today in 2024, but in 1998 it was virtually unheard of in FPSs. Let's be clear here, so we don't misunderstand each other. Sin is nowhere near as good or iconic as the FPS giants were, but it's a very fun game in its own right and one that shook the genre, proving that it could still innovate across semi-filling dozens upon dozens of different FPS games. First Carmageddon is considered as the best game in the trilogy by the majority of all gamers, and for good reason. It was first, and in the case of a very innovative, extremely violent and bloody, previously unseen gameplay, it counts as something, a lot. And it was a rather polished game, meaning it didn't feel rushed to cash in on holiday release rush, or as if features were cut, omitted, unfinished, or generally speaking lacking direction. It was a complete package. Now, second Carmageddon, subtitled Carpocalypse Now, was more of an evolution rather than revolution. It featured hardware acceleration, support for higher resolution and color palettes, better models for the city roadside objects and cars which had their damage model completely reworked too, all to include more external visual cues corresponding to the inner state of the vehicle. Heck, given the right amount of damage, cars could be even split in half, instantly rendering them unusable. Levels, or tracks I should say really, were bigger and more varied now too, featuring more sideways, shortcuts and points of interest. And finally, all opponents' cars that you wrecked during races became purchasable after the race, provided you had enough money. Same as in original, you could try to race in Carmageddon II, winning the race by completing a certain number of laps in time. Also, same as in the first game, I've never seen it happen, nor heard of anyone who'd done it. Most of us gamers went for the elimination of all opposing cars, which was more fun, often faster, as they were not only fighting you but each other as well, and bloodier. And back then, games that spilled hospitals worth of crimson liquids were everything, for better or worse. For me, Carmageddon II was a better game than the original. It had new maps, featured more cars that were deforming as much as my sanity was, so with each crash and each pedestrian driven over, and the power-ups/weapons were not only over the top, unrealistic and crazy, but most importantly so much fun to use. So I often found myself scouting for the best ones and then camping to assassinate any and all cars that would happen to pass me by. It was hella fun. What wasn't though were the occasional missions. They sounded like a good idea, so stuff like killing all cows, destroying all the antennas or whatever else, but in reality they were subject to a very restrictive and unforgiving timer, making them unnecessarily stressful in otherwise most of the time silly game. I still loved it, and it was my fave out of all three games. But it was also one that annoyed me the most too. What do you think of 1998 so far? Also, Free Body's Problem. I know it's not place for it here and now, but I'm curious. Have you seen it? Did you like it? Does it strike you to be a bit similar to Salvation, also a series once found on Netflix? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. Smash them if you have to, it helps more than you could ever know. Also, I would like to thank you and all my amazing Patreon and YouTube members for helping this channel keep going. And last but definitely not least, I would like to thank all the wonderful folks who record and upload playthroughs, let's plays and other retro-centric videos here on YouTube, because they help to preserve the games that would have otherwise belonged forgotten. So thank you.